Hello, can you hear us? Yes. So good morning. I'm Anne-Caroline Tanguy, call me AC. I'm leading marketing for AWS in France, and I'm with...
Hi, I'm Alicia. I'm a marketing specialist intern here in Virginia with AWS Social Media.
And we are delighted to be your room hosts today. So before starting this session, we will just give you a few housekeeping reminders. The exit is at the back of the room on your right. Please use the right part of the exit. And the bathrooms are also on your right, a little bit further on the hall. And if you haven't done it yet, I invite you to download the application, AWS Events.
Yeah, it's AWS America's Events for iOS users. You can go ahead and download it at the App Store. For Android users, there is a link that you do want to follow, which is spread out throughout the whole venue. So just keep an eye out for that, and you can find the schedule, speaker information, and so much more on it. So make sure to download that.
And please put your mobiles on mute or turn them off during this session. And let's kick off enabling resilience through the cloud AWS Disaster Response Program. And I'm really happy to invite on stage Maggie Carter of AWS, Frank Patera, AWS, and our customer, Joe Hillis, Operations Director at ITDRC. Give them a hand.
Thank you, AC. So I'm Maggie, and I lead the AWS Disaster Response Program, and I'm pleased to be up here today with my colleagues, Frank Patera, and our customer/friend, Joe Hillis.
Thanks.
So just so you're aware, we launched the AWS Disaster Response Program publicly last year, 2018, to support our customers who are responding to disasters. So, to better help leverage technology, whether in the cloud or at the edge, for preparation and response. And so our program's tenets, which is a very Amazonian thing, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
Disaster has multiple definitions.
Yes.
Physical, electronic, so like FEMA has a disaster system, and they have to go after physical disaster. So I just want to understand where you're coming from.
Sure, it's a great question. So for us, we're really helping customers that are responding to natural and man-made disasters, right? Does that help clarify?
Yes, and you're discussing the system they're using to go after them or how they integrate.
Okay, so we'll hold questions to the end, but yes, we'll go through this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. So helping support our customers, to better respond, thank you. So build out sorry, I'm thrown off right now. So we want to invest in the build out and deployment of services and applications for disasters, right? That would have broader applicability. So we find that our customers, when we're supporting them in disaster times, in austere conditions, and we're showcasing together how technology performs in disaster situations, we're actually finding that customers realize the potential of that technology in non-disaster scenarios as well. And then for us at AWS and across Amazon, we're training Amazon technical experts to support customers in deploying them with customers like ITDRC to help help support the community post-disaster. And then, our goal is to ideally position Amazon as a positive, proactive force in the global community. Great. So we have some featured use cases. And Joe will go deeper into this, but in order to access the cloud and technology, rebuilding connectivity is critical. So we've collaborated with ITDRC, Information Technology Disaster Resource Center, to help rebuild connectivity in local communities where it's been impacted by disasters, whether hurricane, wildfire, floods, et cetera. Disaster mapping, we've been collaborating with organizations like Humanitarian OpenStreetMaps and others to help map impacted areas so responders can better prepare and respond to disasters, whether that's in Uganda or the Kerala floods. And then building applications for good, so also collaborating with APN partners or with customers like Colorado University's Earth Labs to build a Twitter classifier that helps the VOAD or the volunteer community to better track and respond to wildfires. So some examples of our support to date, what you can see on the far left is actually a deployment. That's one of our disaster response action team members who's on deployment with ITDRC in California, and that's after the wildfires last year. And then on the right, this is one of our AWS employees, Ami Kwok, who's helping to support American Red Cross during Hurricane Florence. What we did was we spun up Amazon Connect, so that's our virtual call center, and then we engaged over 100 employees to help take calls from victims and loved ones during Hurricane Florence, during the peak demand time. So the program focus areas, I've talked about our disaster response action team, and I'll go deeper into that. But you know, that's really, we have a roster of technical employees that we have deployed. Now we're at about 40 employees, primarily in the Americas, but we're expanding globally, that we have deployed 4 times now with ITDRC after an incident. And we're looking at, you know, what does this look like globally and who do we work with? So on the information side, it's turning data into actionable information at the edge. So that way responders are better informed when they're responding. And then technologies, like I said, so leveraging Amazon, AWS technology, partner technology, et cetera, whether it's in the cloud or at the edge for our customers to better respond. Right? So along our roadmap, identify how we can uniquely help, right? Whether it's AWS or AWS plus the partner community, AWS partner plus customer. Inspect our innovations for potential reuse, which I said, in disaster response and broader efforts. And this year, we're looking to scale the program globally. Like I said, we launched the program in the Americas last year. And then collaborate with a partner network of relief organizations like ITDRC and the American Red Cross. We want to help and not harm existing operations. We don't want to go in and just say, hey, we're here to help and disrupt a well-oiled machine. And then use our program to engage employees. Right now, we're primarily focusing on AWS employees, but right now we're also looking at how do we engage our partner network as well to engage their employees in these efforts. And coming soon, we are launching the AWS Disaster Response Competency, so focusing on technology partners and consulting partners. And so if anybody's interested in that, you can come see us at the booth or come see Layla, Clark, or I on the floor after this to find out more about what that is. But we're really excited. So the AWS Disaster Response Action Team, I think we have a few folks here. I see Matt, Don, Chris, come on, stand up, just stand up. So here's a few of our Disaster Response Action Team members. These gentlemen, thank you guys, are, like I said, they're technical employees, and they have been trained on NIMS, and then CPR and first aid, and then on some of our technologies, and then on partner technologies as well. So they can then, they're well equipped to then support organizations like ITDRC post-incident. So I've kind of gone through what we do, why we do it. So here it is. I'm not going to talk through that, but it's to better prepare organizations for the response. So when we do it, we look at the severity of an incident and based on the customer or the community's need. So, you know, hurricanes Florence, Michael, after the wildfires, those were, you know, pretty catastrophic incidents where we sent our employees into the field. After the Nebraska floods, it was a local, it was, I'd say, a smaller catastrophe, but we, it was of critical importance to our community. And so for us, we felt like that was an important disaster to send our employees into the field with ITDRC. What's important is customers should be onboarded into the AWS DRT program. We're not going to just send employees out when we've never collaborated with an organization on the ground before. Okay. So we've already gone through this, how we do it. We have 40 technical volunteers. They're certified. What's important here is that they are also trained on, how the data and the customer and what their needs are from a technology perspective. And this is where I'm going to hand it over to my friend, Frank Patera, who's also what I like to call the Snow Father.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming today and for spending your time with us. I really appreciate it. So my name's Frank Patera. I've been with AWS for about 6.5 years, and I've been working with the AWS Snow products since the launch of the products. I don't know familiarity with the products here in the room, what Snow is, but it's a physical device that AWS produces to help accelerate moving data into the cloud and to support edge processing. It's a great product to be used in places where there may not be connectivity, where you may not have technical resources, where the cloud's not reachable because networks are down or power is unreliable. And so that's the product. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. For disaster response, it is very helpful when you're deploying to one of these environments after a hurricane or after a fire and infrastructure is gone, and you need to be able to bring with you some amount of data that you can act on when you're there, so mapping data or other information about the area, and you need to be able to do some processing. So that's how the Snowball Edge product contributes here to this. So a little bit more on Snowball. So we launched it in 2015 with the first product over on the, I guess it's the left side there, which was just a data transport device. So it was a 80 terabyte device that you could easily ship to a location, copy your data, ship it back to AWS. We'd import your data into the cloud. And by reverse, you could also take your data out of the cloud to use it locally. In 2016, we launched Snowball Edge. And what that is the same very secure, ruggedized, easy to use, with automated logistics device as the first Snowball, but with a compute on board the device. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that one later. But basically, that's what gives you the ability to do that processing on site. We also have the extra large edition, the Snowmobile. I know how many of you were at reInvent in 2016 when we launched that, but it's literally a 45-foot container on a truck and carries 100 petabytes of data. So that's if you're moving a lot of data into the cloud. Probably not the disaster response scenario, but just another part of the family of Snow products. So Snowball Edge. As I mentioned, it's a ruggedized device. This device can get rained on. It doesn't ship in a box. It ships just like you see the picture there. And you can, by the way, after this, I invite you to go to the disaster response booth downstairs. And there are 2 of them down there that people are using for demos and things. You can touch it and feel it. But it ships just like it is. It can be bounced around and banged around. On the top there, the little window on the top is actually an e-ink display where we put a shipping label. So no one has to apply a shipping label to send it around. All the logistics are automated. When you're finished with it, the shipping label switches to the return label. So literally all you do is hand it off to the UPS driver, or if you're in another country, the local carrier in that country, and it gets back to us. So very easy to use from that perspective. People use it to collect data in real time when you're operating in these environments. For example, you'll see this downstairs in the booth. If you're flying drones around and collecting imagery data on buildings or roads and things that can be collected onto the Snowball Edge and assembled with additional mapping data you have from OpenStreetMaps or other sources, and then you can direct people to the right places where aid's most needed or where additional support is needed. So that's the ability to collect and to process on the edge. The device comes in a few different flavors. I really don't want to go into too much detail, but it's between 42 terabytes for a device with lots and lots of compute to 100 terabytes with a device with less compute available on it, but still a significant amount of work to do. It's a little bit of AWS that you can take with you. So we run on the device a number of services that have the same APIs as what you use in the cloud to talk to the cloud-based services. And I'll talk about a few of those next. But what this means is the applications you write for the cloud will run on the Snowball Edge. So you don't have to write your software twice, and you don't have to have a special implementation for what you're taking to the edge. And so there's a little bit more details on the amount of compute available with the device. That continues to change. There's actually much larger editions available of how much you can run on one single device. And it's a really easy model to use. So for disaster response, this is largely something that AWS provides, just like we volunteer people to go for disaster response. Thank you all very much. This is something that we provide for these environments as well. But if you're using it for commercial reasons or for public service reasons that you're going to purchase it, it's a really simple model. It's inexpensive. You get one for $300, and you get it for 10 days. And if you want to keep it longer, it's $30 a day. So pretty cheap, easy to use. I mentioned it's a little bit of AWS that you can bring with you. We have some AWS services on. We're continuing to add services. So EC2 is our virtual machines that you run in the AWS cloud. So the ability to run your applications on your own Windows or a Linux operating system. The same ones you write in the cloud, the same ones that run there, just export to the Snowball Edge. So when you order it, you say, I want this data and I want these applications, and we prepare that and ship it out to you. So when you receive it, you literally plug it in, turn it on, and unlock it, and you're able to use the device. S3 is very large storage for the cloud. There's an API-compatible implementation of this on the Snowball Edge, so you talk to it just like you talk to the cloud to store your data. We recently launched in the end of April Elastic Block Storage compatible service for our Snowball Edge. So those EC2 instances or the virtual machines you can attach volumes to and store more data and process it quickly for larger databases and things like that. And then AWS Lambda, if you're familiar with that, is event-based programming. So when you write data to the Snowball, an event occurs, you wrote the data. And so I want to react to that event. So perform a certain application when an event happens. Whether it's writing data or whether there's a sensor in the field that says water's rising or temperatures are a certain level, react to that and execute a function. And so it's a very automated, easy thing to use. And that all just goes right on the Snowball Edge. One use case, go forward. I would go to the one use case, but the button, there we go.
Yeah.
So one use case that we use Snowball for disaster response, you may recall last year in Hawaii, there's a volcano eruption, and the National Geological Survey's facility in Hawaii was actually in danger of being destroyed. It was in the anticipated flow of the lava. They had on site there 40 years of geological survey data, and that was the copy of it. So that was the information they collected over 4 years, and they didn't want to lose it. And so we were able to get a Snowball shipped out to Hawaii to get to them, and they carried it into their facility and loaded the data onto it, shipped it back to us, and all that data is now running in the AWS cloud in our Ohio region. So those two gentlemen are carrying a Snowball as they're walking in. You can see it's not that big of a device, weighs less than 50 pounds. They're actually walking on ash. Thank you, ash from the volcano as it's fallen down on their facility. And this facility was not accessible after they moved the data in. So it was a great success that we could pull this off and get this. So that's one example, and we've worked with Maggie and Joe on some other examples. And I think we're going to hand back to Maggie to talk about some of those.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So this is our ultimate goal, right? It is what is the art of possible for our customers, right? And so we're looking at how do we, on the left-hand side, right, how are they operating in the cloud? And how can we enable that as close to the operator in the field as possible, right? So bringing those services, bringing those applications, partner applications, into the, whether it's a fob, right, or an operations center in the field. So whether that's through the Snowball Edge and other partner solutions, that's what we're looking to enable through the disaster response program. Okay, great. And so we have another, one more use case that I want to talk about. And this is last August, I think it was. We collaborated with the Peruvian Air Force, Peru Flying Labs, Drone Deploy, and Esri to analyze pre-incident aerial imagery that was localized on the Snowball Edge and then through drone imagery, we were able to process the pre and post-incident imagery on the Snowball Edge locally. And so what that showed was how we can reduce decision-making time, analysis time, et cetera, by being able to do all of that locally with low or no connectivity. So again, that's just another way that we're trying to show the art of possible. And now I'm going to hand it over to Joe Hillis, who is the Operations Director of ITDRC. And like I said, we've had the pleasure of deploying our volunteers with Joe and his team 4 times now, after Hurricane Florence in North Carolina, Hurricane Michael in the Panhandle of Florida, Northern California with the wildfires, and then most recently Nebraska with the floods. Thank you, Joe, for all you do.
Thank you, absolutely. Good morning. A couple of quick questions. I guess first question is, anybody in the room ever been impacted by a disaster? Your business? See 1, 2, couple of hands, few hands, several hands, okay. And I think the other thing is has anybody ever responded to a disaster, post-disaster, to help with that? Okay, so the reason for my question really is to say that the wrong time to figure out what your disaster strategy is, your response strategy is in the middle of a disaster. We say that that's the wrong time to be exchanging business cards. I'm with the Information Technology Disaster Resource Center, or ITDRC for short. It's a volunteer-driven, and all volunteer-driven nonprofit based here in the U.S. Our goal, our mission really is to provide communities with whatever technology resources they need, not only before a disaster, but certainly during and after a disaster. So we do run the disaster life cycle with communities. Some of the things we're more, I hate to say we're more interested in, but the area that we kind of cater to is the physical layer. Connectivity is probably the number one thing that communities need after disaster. We're not a replacement for the phone company, or we're not in competition with industry. They've certainly got their own infrastructure to take care of. What we do is we provide solutions for communities to enable them to begin recovery. So whether it's continuing operations, a lot of times we see that these remote areas throughout the United States, and they have an event that comes through, they don't get quite the response that you see for a big hurricane or something like that. And so we kind of try to bridge that gap with technical resources in the interim. So a lot of what we provide to these communities is really the voice and the network infrastructure. We get a number of different types of backhaul, whether it's cellular broadband, whether it's satellite, VSAT, whatever that is. Certainly, as a nonprofit, we're able to go to industry inside of a community that may have a connectivity, and we may be able to tap into that and extend that out for a shelter, for example, or some other critical communications. Wi-Fi hotspots, and we say that this would be things like in a community gym, gymnasium. We certainly set up hotspots where the people are. It's not, we don't necessarily build things and expect people to come. We try to figure out where the populations have evacuated to, or where they're congregating, and then we'll set up connectivity there for them. Internet cafe, the same thing. This is a lot of the work that we do is in the shelters, the Red Cross shelters. So these folks, once they're evacuated, they could spend literally weeks inside of a shelter. It just depends on what the event is. Sometimes it's just an overnight thing and a smaller event, but the more the ones that we gear up for the hurricanes, for the tornadoes, where they've had large areas destroyed, where you have a large number of families that are staying in shelters. So phone banks, those are some of the things. There's a lot of things that happen when a disaster hits a community, a lot of recovery things. So information phone lines, for example. Volunteer and donations are very big. People are sending truckloads of water. They're sending all types of resources to a community. And so all that stuff there has to be some sort of infrastructure stood up to be able to respond to that. And so what we do is we provide those temporary resources, whether it's laptops or whether it's connectivity or whether it's phone lines, things like that. Anybody that's in charge of ordering phone lines here, if you've ever placed an order for a phone line with the phone company, I've seen them take 3 months to get a phone line in, and we can produce these in minutes. So that's really kind of what our strength is on the physical side. So charging stations, one of our Hurricane Harvey after actions was everybody's got their cell phones and they don't have a charger, they don't have a place to do that. So we're doing a lot of charging stations in the last couple of years. But anything compute hardware, connectivity-wise, radio-wise, whether it's because public safety has lost their radio infrastructure and they need temporary radios, or whether it's they have a donations warehouse or something like that that needs radios. So these are things that we provide for them. But probably our biggest one is that we're a technical force multiplier. And most communities, and I'm talking about in really the public sector, they don't necessarily have enough staff to keep up with day-to-day operations, much less when you have a significant disaster that impacts them. So this is through ITDRC, this is a venue that we can take people just like yourselves, and certainly the AWS team that have the technical expertise in different disciplines, where we can bring them into a community as a trusted resource, and they can just act as an extension of one of the groups inside the community. So that's really kind of who we are and what we do. Quickly, there's about 1,500 what we call credentialed members. These are individuals who have volunteered with the organization, who've signed up to volunteer with the organization, that may or may not be associated with their employer. But then we have also, a number of organizations just like AWS that where we can tap into their employee volunteering programs when there's a disaster, and so we can get more people, and whether it's just to staff computers at a shelter to show people how to use them, or whatever that is, whatever the need is that involves technology. We're able to reach into these employee volunteer programs for that. I think we're getting up close to about 90 what we consider major disaster responses. This is nationwide, and of course ITDRC just serves the U.S. and its territories. We're an 11-year-old organization. In the beginning, we served just the continental United States, just because we didn't necessarily have the logistics to get people other places. But Hurricane Maria, last year, I guess, is when we were able to take that step and do a little bit more in the outside territories. So Hurricane Maria was our largest operation, still is. We still have volunteers. We have about 22 volunteers in Puerto Rico that continue to help Puerto Rico with the recovery down there. So kind of our core capabilities, and ITDRC is we have an MOU with FEMA, and so we're somewhat of a trusted resource to local, state, federal emergency management. We don't contract to the government because that's a totally separate thing. You can't buy anything from ITDRC. Everything we do is a free resource, free labor. All of our resources typically are donated by industry as well as the labor. I mean, these technologists come from industry, and they're experts in their field. We keep another leg into the voluntary side of things, which VOAD is what we call Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. So think Red Cross, Salvation Army, folks like that. We're a trusted resource to them, and so we do partner with a number of organizations like Team Rubicon, which is a veteran-based disaster response organization with 100,000 volunteers. So we provide all their field technology for when they stand up an operation, of which right now they have a number of operations going across the country. So, essentially we're just a clearinghouse for anything technology that a community needs after a disaster. We're vendor agnostic. We work with all the vendors. Any vendor that wants to be involved, in a meaningful way, we're certainly the vehicle for that. And so our value prop to our partners, like AWS, which is, if you'll afford, your employees the time off, we'll take care of them from door to door. We'll get them out to the field. We'll, get them into a place where they can use their skills in a meaningful way, and then send them back with, hopefully a good lifelong experience. So we do follow the 10 FEMA regions. So we have a West, a Central, and an East division. And then we have the 10 FEMA regions underneath that. And so all of our volunteers are placed into a region. When there is an event somewhere, we'll activate typically our local regional volunteers first. Obviously, we're a numbers-based organization because most of these folks, have to burn their vacation off, time off to come. So for us, numbers is the game. We have to have a lot of folks to be able to get out and do that, and especially if we're doing a 3-month operation where we need volunteers continuously for a few months. So obviously a lot of these events, certainly the ones that make the news, the ones that you're aware of, are ones that we do a national response. And so that's where we reach into, our membership, throughout the country to move folks. So we have some distributed, region. We have our central service center in DFW area. It's, central to the U.S. That's where the majority of our big assets are located. But we also have distributed caches, whether it's, response trailers, on the West Coast, East Coast, whether there's storage stalls in different places. And then we also have some partnerships that we leverage, particularly with data centers, where we're able to, when there's an active disaster, where we'll stage our resources in there so they're secured, they're controlled, access and things like that. So we have just a variety of assets. These are NIMS type 1, 2, 3, and 4 mobile command centers, which is just different types of communications vehicles. So from small trailers to large semi-trailers, that's the types of resources that we have available. Obviously, they're free resources to a community. They just have to kind of demonstrate the need. And our folks also do, I hate to say the word study, what's the word I'm looking for? But we do require them to go through the ICS and the NIMS training, as well as some internal training before they're able to deploy to the field with us. So we have also a critical information systems team, which is where a number of folks with varied skill sets from systems, network, wireless, things like that, RF, where they actually have to go through the FBI InfraGard. Members have to have an FBI InfraGard membership in order to be on our CIS team. A lot of the smaller communities, certainly when you're dealing with law enforcement, people like that, they recognize the FBI InfraGard credential. And so we know that if somebody's on our CIS team, they have that, which just kind of ensures a public trust background check. And then, of course, our Disaster Tech Task Force program, of which AWS is part of. So a number of larger technology providers participate in that, and so we're all able to work and deploy together. We're all able to collaborate. Obviously each has their strengths, and they bring something different to the table. So certainly on our larger events, that's when we bring our tech task force. We activate our tech task force. And then they participate, whether it's in calls, whether it's in collaboration, just to get people and resources out into a field. So some of the places we've been over the last several years, I'm not sure exactly when this slide was pulled, but green is the open sites, reds are closed sites. But effectively, we keep somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 open sites at any given time. And that's how many sites that we're tending to, our volunteers are tending to, from previous disasters. So we don't necessarily go away when the TV cameras go away. We continue to help these communities for months and years afterwards. We still have resources in Joplin from the 2011 tornado, in New York City from Hurricane Sandy. So the resources, once we commit to a community, the resources will stay there as long as they're needed. When they're done, they just ship them back to us. We'll clean them up and send them out again. So some of the skill sets, some of the services that we bring for our disaster response program, again, the majority of our stuff is physical. There are some other pieces that we have, which we certainly leverage the AWS cloud for our hosted PBX, for example. So we set a whole lot of IP telephones in these shelters and these command centers and things like that, the things that we have control over. So we have literally hundreds and hundreds of phone caches that we can get out there quickly. So we do leverage the cloud. There are some applications that we use, but for the majority of the stuff that we do is physical. We have also our remote response team. We realize that a lot of these folks have families, full-time jobs. They're working their 60, 80 hours a week. They're going to school, doing whatever that is, but they still want to be involved in disaster relief in some way. And so they get connected up with our remote response team. And it's somewhat of a micro-task thing. It could be anything from project management, where they help track the sites that we've opened up or the resources that we put, or whether it's remote monitoring of the networks, whether it's pulling daily stats, whether it's scraping social media for other opportunities for us to engage in the community. There's a lot of tasks that happen through our remote response team. And so usually, anytime we have an active deployment somewhere, we have people on the back end. So it's kind of a one-for-one, having somebody on the back end to make sure that they're taking care of the crews in the field, whatever that is. So if this is something that appeals to you, let's talk afterwards. And logistics, and we pretty much take care of the majority of our own logistics. In some of the larger events, the hurricanes, this happened to be a picture from Hurricane Michael last year. We have to take care of our people once we send you out into the field. So there's not near enough housing to go around. Typically, in a significant size disaster, housing was, you could rent hotels, a couple, 2-3 hours away. Somewhere, but when you've got somebody that's having to drive 2 or 3 hours a day, into a disaster area, for us it's easier just to bring the logistics there, to house them, to feed them, to take care of them there. So we do take care of our own logistics for the most part with some help. Certainly the UPS Foundation helps us move these things across the country, and other partners help us fill in the gaps wherever we need to with that. But for the most part, we take care of our field crews and whatever it is that they need. We do a lot of forward pushes. Just as an example, during Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, we shipped about 55 shipments, I think. So Southwest Airlines, donated all the shipping for us. We went every day to the airport and we dropped off, up to 200 pounds of equipment that we could send. And so we did that, 55 shipments. From Texas to Puerto Rico, and that's how we got our equipment populated over there. So, being a nonprofit has its benefits. Industry certainly supports us however they can, and we're able to leverage their resources for things, and so that's how we accomplish our mission. So our priorities, and that's probably the number one asked question. It's like, how do you decide where you're going to go and who you're taking care of? Life safety always gets the first cut at our resources. So whether it's police, fire, EMS, emergency management, anything to take care of the people, as far as from a safety and security perspective, they get the first cut at our resources. Secondly, we go to mass care, and that's like feeding and sheltering. And so in this, in the response phase of a disaster, obviously their first goal is to stop the hazard, whatever it is, put the fire out. Whatever the issue is part of the response phase. But after that, then it is, how are we going to take care of the people, and where are we going to take care, where are we going to feed them, where are we going to shelter them, and then they'll eventually get into some of the longer things, is where they're going to stay for the next 2 years while they're rebuilding their homes. So, long-term recovery is a multi-year process. Just as an example, with the Campfire in Northern California, they lost 18,000 plus homes there. And there's not enough contractors to rebuild those homes in a year or 2 years or whatever. So you've got these populations that are going to be displaced for years and years and years. In that case, that's where we set up, Wi-Fi in trailer parks and temporary housing units where they have, just an aggregate of these housing units in where they're going to be for a couple of years, where people are going to be staying. So community recovery, we don't always need this. Sometimes, if local government has done their job right, then, or maybe the storm just bypassed that, or whatever that is, we may not have to do anything for local government. Certainly there are no, I got to word this carefully because I think there are FEMA people in the room. Communities are not necessarily able to tap the resources of the federal government, right? Federal government's a checkbook. And so what we find is that, when we go into a community after a disaster, there may be a police station that's had their tower blown down. That's not something that FEMA comes in. They don't come in and stand up a new tower, give them a new piece of coax, replace the radio or whatever that is. There's not really an entity that takes care of these smaller communities, and that's really by design. It is supposed to be when a local mayor declares an emergency, he goes to the county judge to ask for resources if they can't handle it. If the county can't fulfill that, then they go to the state, and that's when the governor, either the state fulfills that or the governor makes a declaration asks for a federal declaration. So there is a lot of bug passing as far as that goes, but operationally, they don't necessarily have time when a fire station can't communicate or something like that. They don't necessarily have time to watch these grant requests go up and down the ladder. So that's some of the places where we come in and fill in those gaps. And then long-term recovery. Taking care of these people through the rebuilding, and as they're, the economic impact on the community is just huge. We're seeing this right now in Florida, where people have, the hurricane came in, it took away all the housing, so people migrated away. The businesses came back in and rebuilt, but they can't get workers because there's no housing for the workers and things like that. So it's just kind of a vicious cycle after a disaster. And so, we will come in and provide them with whatever resources they need, whether it's to set up, a job fair, or whether it's to set up, something at the Chamber of Commerce to try to lure business back there. That's really some of the places that we play in. So we have only one question, and it does it benefit the whole community? If we can check that box, then we can serve that. ITDRC as a nonprofit is, we're all about, taking care of the community. And we do get requests for individual things. An example that I like to give is if Betty's Hair Salon says, I've lost my phone line and my computer, can you come restore that so I can open the doors back? Well, the answer is kind of no. But if Betty's Hair Salon happens to be that community organizer who's got 50 pallets of water out back and is serving hot meals, twice a day, Betty gets whatever Betty wants. So we'll certainly, set up Wi-Fi there because that's where all the people are coming to eat. So we try to, work with these communities, but we do, analyze each and every request on really against this one. This is our only litmus test, is does it benefit the whole community? So some examples. So, that's a little bit about the organization. What I want to talk about is some of the things that we've done with the AWS team. I don't have to tell you that these guys are guys and gals, I don't know, are professionals in what they do. And when they come into the field, we don't necessarily know, and they don't necessarily know what they're going to be asked to do. So I just want to take a walk through some of the 4 deployments, at least 3 of the 4 deployments that we went last year.
Let's quickly walk through those.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Hurricane Florence was, and the good part about it is, like I kind of led off with, we had already exchanged business cards in advance of this last year. So, when hurricane season lit off last year, AWS, we were already ready to go. I mean, we had each other's phone numbers, we'd had, correspondence, we'd had meetings and things like that. And so we knew that we could count on an AWS team to deploy into the field with us. So, some of the things that we did there, if you were tracking that hurricane, that the town of Surf City, which is kind of where Hurricane Florence made landfall, it wiped out their city hall. It put their city hall underwater. And so, they were all of a sudden faced with how do we continuity of government, right? Where do we go? What do we do? How do we do this? We don't have these technical resources. So obviously we deployed a number of people. I think we deployed 22, 25 volunteers to that. And we helped this community with everything from getting their SCADA systems back online. Their sewer plants were offline. They couldn't pump the sewer, so obviously it was a communications issue. So we restored communications for these guys. When they lost their city hall and they had to move into another city facility, we sourced telephones for them. We got them on, IP phone service. They lost their fiber ring around the community, and so they couldn't talk between, city hall, police stations, fire stations, the water plants, things like that. So we helped do, temporary communications for that. And anything from just, they lost the computer that held their reentry database. So the town, being a coastal community, had the forethought to have every resident in town had a credential that, for reentry. They just happened to have lost that system. So we were able to leverage the volunteers, the technical volunteers, and PS, they have one IT guy at the town of Surf City. And so when you have your entire infrastructure that's just crumbled around your knees, they needed somebody to turn to. And so we were able to bring, the different skill sets from not only the AWS folks, but from a lot of the other partners that we have in to solve some of these problems for them. Probably the one that sticks out the most for that was, they lost the school. They lost several schools in North Carolina. And, as we, assess these communities to find out what their unmet needs were. We found out, this high school is gone, the middle school is gone, the elementary school is gone, and we're going to have to move into, this temporary old school until we can open our new high school, which was slated to open up the next year. One of the things they didn't have was they lost all their computers, and so we were able to go out and source about 60 desktops for 2 computer labs. That's what they wanted, was computer labs. And so, certainly I know a couple of the folks in this room, worked on setting these computers up in the computer labs for these things. So it's the little actions that we can do to help get these communities back online. Once you close the school for several weeks after a hurricane or after a catastrophic event, the community needs to open that school, not just because they're going to lose their summer, but because these kids are sitting around all day long and they need to get back onto the regular schedule to be able to move forward emotionally. So these are just some of the places that we were able to help in North Carolina. Hurricane Michael certainly was a much bigger, much larger impact. Ultimately it was deemed a Category 5. This happens to be a picture inside of a shelter inside of a high school library. They moved all the library pieces out of that, and so ultimately at this particular school, they were housing I want to say 5,000 or 6,000, if I remember, evacuees at this particular location. Obviously, they too had lost their internet connectivity. One of the things that they needed was Wi-Fi for these people in the shelter. This is all you have. This is the square footage you have. If you've never been into a shelter, it's not a really happy place to be. But one of the best things we can give them is some Wi-Fi so they can get on their telephone, they can watch a movie, they can do whatever that is. We do the same thing with video. But these are some of the challenges that we were faced with in Michael. The picture that you see on the left was it's a DSNAP, so it's a disaster food stamp thing. And 2 days, I think, before they opened that, they said, hey, we're expecting 30 to 50,000 people to come in and apply for food stamps over this 3-day event. And oh, by the way, we need connectivity. We're bringing in 150 people to process their thing. So, our task was pretty simple. It's just what we do. So, we stood up some satellite, we put some Wi-Fi in there, we did some connectivity for them. Little things like that. The picture on the right happens to be, one of the mass feeding places. There was 500 seats in there. And so they had to feed people in shifts because they had so many people staying at this particular shelter. But the same thing, we put television in there so they could watch the news, the weather, whatever that is, give them some Wi-Fi, so as long as they're in there, we're giving them something to look at. More technically, we had a request from the county down there, and the county lost a lot of infrastructure, and so simple things like point-to-point links. They'd lost their fiber everywhere, and that's not something that, you just don't have millions of feet of fiber laying around, or certainly the funding to do it or whatever. So we were able to put up a lot of point-to-point links, and I say several point-to-point links to try to restore some of the critical services. This particular one was a water treatment plant, which had been offline for several weeks before we actually put that in. And then this particular place, this is after a disaster. I talked about volunteer and donations management, and what you'll see is people will send, companies will send, and rightly so, truckloads of water and diapers and blankets and things like that. But then you'll also have the community will come to pick those things up, and a lot of times they're just coming to pick up a gallon of bleach, a case of water, things like that, things to kind of get their homes cleaned up as best as they can. And so we try to provide them with the infrastructure. This just happened to be one of the ones in Panama City that we did, but this is what you can expect. It's all day long, vehicles just coming through to come and get commodities. So certainly infrastructure to track that's what we need. And lastly, just talk about the Campfire. The Campfire, I don't remember how many AWS folks, I want to say we sent 4, 5, 6 AWS folks out there to work with our volunteers. And they were challenged with getting Wi-Fi, getting a lot of these people connected, and this happened to be, one of the neat pictures. There's actually another picture that they have drawn all the remote access points where they had done the point-to-multipoint wireless distribution. But it is, when you have thousands of people who are evacuating to these campgrounds and places like that, they need connectivity. the cell carriers aren't necessarily up, or people don't, not everybody has, believe it or not everybody has Wi-Fi on their phone. So, part of what we do is put, Wi-Fi in these centers for that. So, just a typical, another shelter inside of, a building there. So, one of the post things that we're doing since then is we're working more now with the state of California to pre-plan all these other, all the other fairgrounds in the state. I think there are 77 of them, just to make sure that we know in advance what's going on with that. So with that, that's my presentation.
Awesome.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. So Joe painted a good picture of what it looks like when communities are impacted by disaster. So what we're aiming to do with the disaster response program is bringing together our community of customers and our APN, our partner network, to help customers and communities better, like I said, prepare and respond to disasters, but how important connectivity, edge computing, et cetera, applications at the edge are to a community's resiliency, and both for the short term and then the long-term recovery. So if you guys want, we're gonna be available on the side, whether it's Frank on the snow efforts, Joe on ITDRC's efforts, or Clark or myself on the AWS Disaster Response Program or the Partner Competency. Will be available down here at the side or down at the booth if you want to check out a Snowball Edge in action. So thank you for your time, and feel free to reach out. Thank you.